Hey everybody, it's vlog day 578. Yeah.
Good morning. Decent run. Slow pace, but it's freezing cold outside. That was quite the shocker. I mean, not the shocker is in that it was a surprise, but physically. Today, I'm going to make a video that I've been mostly dreading making. Well, I don't know. It's kind of up in the air. I don't dread it as much anymore. I dreaded it more like a couple months ago, and then it's kind of settled in. But I have a story to tell you. This is going to be kind of a sit down and talk to the camera vlog. So for those of you who are bored with those, come back tomorrow. There'll be more music and montage then. I think it's an important story to share, and it's one that I don't want to. I don't have to, but I feel like I should. And so I'm going to share it, and I hope that you'll listen. And otherwise, yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. But first, I'm going to shower because I don't think you want to look at this for that much longer. So this is a video, like I said, that's actually not really easy to make. I didn't want to make it yesterday because for whatever reason, I was kind of just in a bad mood yesterday. And I don't know why, because the last couple of days have actually been really, a lot of good stuff has come through. I found out my Teach Séjour is ready, or is going to be ready in 2 weeks, which is huge news because that means that it's done. It took a year, but it's done, and I'm here, and I'm actually here. I think it'll feel more real. Saying that made it feel pretty real. I think it'll feel really real when I have it in my hands, but it's like, I'm legal, I'm here, like I'm set. I believe for the next 4 years. We'll find out. We'll find out when we see it. Hopefully there are no surprises there. And we're halfway to 2 goals back here on the goal board. Like there's a lot of good stuff going on. And last night I actually got artwork for couriers, at least some precursive artwork, at least some precursory artwork, which I will probably share with my patrons here this week, give you guys a sneak peek after I've looked at it and corresponded with Nimitz a little bit more. So there's a lot of really cool stuff going on, but I've been meaning to make this video for a really long time. I just haven't been able to for legal reasons. I've tried to drop hints along the way that something was going on, and it wasn't even necessarily that it was legal reasons, but like my lawyer and my dad in particular really didn't want me to make this until everything was over with. Actually, I don't think my parents really would want me to make this video anyways in some ways. And it goes both ways, but this is a video about the last few years in particular and how everything got to rock bottom this last summer in some really, really tangible ways that I had to crawl out of. And I feel like we're on the upswing now and things feel really good. And I would have liked to have shared this more openly earlier, but again, I was counseled not to, just to be safe. And I figured, better to be safe than sorry. So this is basically the story about how I hit rock bottom, and I really do feel like I'm climbing back out. And a lot of you are actually a big part of that. Basically, a few years ago, I started a tech company with a few friends. I was working as a consultant on electronic medical records at the time, so I was on an airplane every few days, flying across the country. I mean, there's a whole other story that goes with that. It was actually a pretty dark period of my life that, like, there are a number of things that came together to make it a really, really, really bad time in my life because I'd just come off the ship. I was super, super burned out. I was heartbroken. I would say the only woman that I've ever truly fallen in love with just destroyed me. I was kind of running around the country. I was alone. I was very lonely. I was just in a really bad space, and I never really had the time to fully decompress from my experiences in West and Central Africa. And so when I had the opportunity to start working on this project with my buddy Brian, who you'll meet when we get to the ship, I was pretty excited. We were making a Bluetooth bracelet for kids, and you'll see that if you go back to the first season. I was still really scared to share it on my vlog, but I was like, well, this would be kind of a cool thing. And I put I put way too much faith in not only that, but a couple other projects, some creative projects as well, including Into the Nanton and my first attempt at doing something with couriers. That consulting job was bound to dry up because at the end of the day, what we were doing was transitioning hospitals and clinics, mostly I was working with clinics, off of paper records and onto electronic records, or off of one software and onto the software that I was trained to use. That's a whole other story, and it's actually kind of an interesting one in a lot of ways. But that transition was bound to end at some point. And when it came to an end, of course, so did the work. And as that work dried up, it was about the time we were getting ready to launch this company that we had started, and we were going to try and lead with a product launch. We were going to try and lead with a Kickstarter. And so I was like, you know what? We have a lot of work to get done. I really think that this is going to work. I want to put everything I can into it. And so I kind of threw myself into it full time. I moved back in with my parents about that time as well because my mom was undergoing a surgery and I wanted to be around and be available. And then I was like, well, I can save money by staying with my parents as well and just dedicate like a year of my life to being in Spokane, which I was not thrilled to be in Spokane, but I was excited to be near my family. But I was like, if whatever it takes, 6 months to a year, I'll focus on working on this. So Brian and I worked full time on Boomerang. But out of the whole team, I had the least financial support, basically. I was really in the worst spot to do that because I already had, student loans and some other debt, as well as just not as much savings as I thought I really did. And as that dried up, it wasn't even, I kind of planned everything out with my savings to make it to the initial launch date that we had set, I think in May. And then we just kept pushing it back. And eventually we launched it, I think in September when I was here in Paris, actually. That's all on the vlog. And as we launched it, I was in a position where I'd burned through my savings. I'd actually burned through my retirement. I'd started working part-time on top of doing all the work for Boomerang and on top of vlogging and everything else. And it was getting really strenuous and I couldn't find work in Spokane that would pay me at that time much more than minimum wage. And then eventually I got about $15 an hour, but still it was only part-time work. And I still needed to put as much effort as I could into the projects. I bounced out of Spokane right before we launched. I was fortunate enough to be able to house sit for my buddy Bryce in the Caribbean just to try and clear my head. I was in a really dark and fairly depressed place already. Just because the walls were closing in, I felt very isolated in Spokane. I felt very alone. And so I was like, I gotta get out of here. So I bounced and I really thought I was done with Spokane. I went to the Caribbean. I didn't know where I'd end up from there. I was just kind of like, I gotta run. I'll figure it out. I came here. We launched our Kickstarter and it flopped big time. It was not good. That's a whole nother discussion as to why Boomerang failed. It's an ongoing discussion even within the company. We chat about where I don't think any of us have settled on any one reason, but we all have reasons that we believe we're the cause ultimately. And when that failed, that was my last hope. I didn't know what else to do. And I'd poured so much into it and I put myself in a pretty risky situation. So I got a different job. That was when the process of possibly moving to France started. I really seriously started considering it. I was happier being in Paris. There was a sign of health that kind of shows up whenever I want to be in Paris. It's like a sign that it's like, okay, I'm healthy. This very much feels like home to me. And so I went back to the States, went to NerdCon to try and sell some books, try and figure myself out, and started looking at applying for the visa. Went back to Washington, was working, moving furniture, because that's all I could really find to do. Was applying for jobs all over. Had finally started applying for jobs back in the summer and just had never got anything all over the country. Just wasn't getting anywhere. Sorry, this is a long story, but I basically got to the point where I was deeply depressed. I've talked about this a little bit before. I have other videos talking about how things were really bad in Spokane, but I wouldn't say that I was suicidal, but I had many, many, many days where I was like, you know what, if this is all life has to offer, I just want to be done. I don't want to do this anymore. This is stupid. I hate this. I felt like I'd been promised so much more in life that was beyond my grasp. I felt like I'd been working so hard for so many years just to see nothing come from them. From all that work, whether it was writing books or, whatever, it was just I was really, really destroyed and the city itself was really not helping. And I just remember being just intensely angry a lot of the time and really, just as stupid things. I never got angry at people really. I never lost my temper with anyone. But when I'd be driving, I would just be so mad. And that wasn't unique to Spokane. That was very much the period of life that I was in where both in Springfield, Illinois, where I was for 10, 11 months and Spokane, both of them just felt like pits that I'd been dropped into, and I would just rage against it and very impotently. And it was hard. It was really, really hard. And I wasn't gonna kill myself, but I would have been happy to die. And not really, because the way that it's actually more accurately put is that I didn't want to die, but I wanted to live. I wanted the opportunity to actually live, and I felt like I was stuck in a horrible limbo that I could never get out of. It was only made worse by just this crushing weight of debt that I had accrued over the course of starting a company. And, I made a couple of bad decisions along the way, but then the risks of that and then not working for a long time, I ended up having to take out a small loan to finance part of my investment because this stuff fell through. It was a comedy of errors that led to this situation where I just kind of allowed the debt to grow in a couple of ways because I was without this, I won't be able to take this big risk. And if the big risk doesn't pay off, then I'm screwed. But if it does pay off, then this is all going to have been worth it. And it didn't work out and I was screwed. So when I came here, I had just enough money to make it for a little while longer. And I came expecting, most of you probably know this story, I came here expecting to work teaching English in an institute not far from here, making good enough money that I would be able to pay my debts and not have to work actually full time like I would have been able to work about part-time, spend a lot of time writing and just kind of figure myself out. That didn't work out either. They did hire me, but they didn't have work for me for 6 months. And I'd spent a whole month just trying to get that job. So I ended up doing bike tours all summer, which was a lot of fun and I really enjoyed it. But the fun of it was kind of ruined a little bit by just the overwhelming weight of all of this stress and all of this debt and like this sense that I was, you're already starting over. You've already failed at a number of things. You're already saying, okay, like I'm being dramatic. I'm moving to a completely different country. I'm doing everything I can to start a new life and make it a good life. And you're trying to do so with just this massive burden on your shoulders. And to give you an idea of how bad it got to the point where I was literally only eating what I made in tips. I had, I wasn't using my credit cards. I hadn't used my credit cards for months because like even though I had space left on them, like the worst thing I could do was keep digging that hole. So I was just trying to like keep that at least level, paying at least the minimum, hopefully a little bit more, but pretty much just paying the minimum on the loan that I had on my student loans. It got to the point where I literally just didn't have any money to eat unless I got tipped. And whatever money I got tipped, then I was like, I just ate as quickly as I could. And so this summer when I made a video about what was stressing me out and that I was having money troubles, that was when I hit a real crisis moment because I had been making enough by doing the tour guiding. I had a couple clients back in the States that I was doing website stuff for. Like I was hustling for everything I could. I was still making, $150 or something a month on Patreon. And that had, thanks to Rob, had been boosted up from like 100. And thanks to all the other patrons who'd been with me for a long time, I had a little bit of money from Patreon. I had a little bit of money from these web jobs I was doing. And then I had money from bike tours. But all of it just vanished every month. It was just gone. That was just surviving. And once we hit August and there was a downturn in tourism and people weren't here anymore and nobody was doing bike tours. It was like we got a reduction in like 30% of our work and I was toast. I was not making enough money and I didn't know what to do and I kept, I was still scrounging and like I was still finding random odd jobs and whatever else I could do, but like it was the end. Like I couldn't do it anymore. And I finally got to that point where a couple of years before when things had really started getting rough, I had a really good friend who's a very strong financial mind. He's brilliant. And he was the first one to say, man, you should go bankrupt. Like my family went bankrupt. It was good for us. It changed everything. You should do it. But I was too proud. I was like, no, I'm going to pay my debts. This is how I was raised. The puritanical American hardworking spirit. I was like, this is how I was raised. I'm going to pay my debts. I'm going to make this work. And then spent the next 2 years drowning, barely keeping my head above water the whole time. And then when I finally went under, I'd been working my butt off to pay off this debt for 2 years and it had only grown basically. I don't think it had gotten a little bit better, I suppose, but I was in a really, really bad spot. And so you can imagine the stress, just like for days, that high-pitched white noise of stress just compressing my brain. And if you go back, you can see just how super stressed I was. And that's why I made that video, is people realized there was a recognition that there was like, hey, what is wrong? And I have a commitment to trying to be open and honest about everything. That was really hard to share, that I was struggling, but the response was so nice. There were a handful of people that actually sent me money right away. They were just like, hey man, I just want you to eat. I want you to feel a little bit better, and I started talking about it. And I think that was the biggest thing. And that's the biggest reason I want to make this video, is that I started talking about it and I started hearing more and more stories of people who had gone bankrupt and been so grateful for it because it was a fresh start, or people that had never gone bankrupt and wished they had and struggled for years to get out from underneath their debt. And so I started getting all this, I started thinking like, okay, well, I'm not alone in this. The statistic that 1 million people a year go bankrupt in the United States, which is insane. Even more insane than most of it's because of medical expenses, but that's a whole other conversation. And got to this place where I was like, okay, maybe I should do this. And I knew, and as I was having that conversation, that's when I think I hit my crisis point and was just like, I don't have a choice anymore. I have to do this because it's either not pay my bills like keep pouring money at it, but I'll start missing payments, which will ruin my credit score anyways, or like eat. And so I was like, I gotta eat. Called some lawyers, started looking around, started finding out real information about the process, about how they advised that I just stop paying immediately, that I file as soon as I could. I found a lawyer who was kind enough to allow me to sign over Skype. So he witnessed me signing my paperwork over Skype, which was very fortunate because he'd never done that before. And that saved me a trip back to the States. I still had to go back to the States to file, but normally you would have to sign in front of the lawyer so they knew that you weren't committing fraud, basically. And that would have meant that I would have had to go back to the Spokane for like 6 weeks, which would have then, I wouldn't have been able to make any money. And you can see how things were like, it was really, really tense. And so I just remember I was just waiting like on this lawyer to like, okay, will he accept me? Okay, can we sign the paperwork? When can we get started? And all of this coming up against my récépissé, because as you'll remember with my immigration situation, that's another reason I never wanted to declare bankruptcy. I didn't know if it would affect my immigration situation. I didn't know if it would if I'd lose my business. Like what happens if I declare bankruptcy and then all of a sudden Boomerang takes off and I lose my share. Like there was a lot of fear. There were a lot of reasons not to do it, but most of them were actually pretty ill-founded. And because for one, the French government, they don't even know my credit score exists back in the States. Like they don't care. The credit system here is a little bit more sensible. And on the business side of things, it's just like all the rest of my stuff. It's like I don't own enough for them to take it. Like I fell within all the exemptions. I found out I don't own enough. I'm so poor, basically. I don't own anything. I don't own this stuff. I don't pay rent. Like even the business never turned a profit. My books have never sold enough to be worth anything. Like nothing I have is worth anything, which is definitely a good way to humble yourself. If you ever want to take full stock of how much you own and realize it's nothing, it's a good way to hopefully remind yourself in the moment that it's not what you have, it's who you are, which you hope is true. That aside, it got so stressful and I was writing notes and I wanted to be sharing it, but I was advised not to. And I wanted to be sharing it in the moment. And the reason being that, like I said, like hearing other people's stories really helped me to feel like, oh, okay, like I'm not alone. This isn't a shameful thing. This happens. Like sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we fail at what we try to do. And sometimes that leaves us with an untenable burden. And I couldn't hold it. And the irony of it is too that I had tried like years before. Remember like the 2 years ago when I was talking with my friend, just over 2 years ago now, I called all my creditors just trying to get help. I reached out to everybody. I tried to get forbearance or deferment or whatever on my loans. And the great irony of it was that none of them would help me until I'd already ruined my credit score. Basically until I'd already been late on my payments, until I'd already screwed up. Then they would start bundling, then they'd start working with me. But they weren't there to help me. I was right where they wanted me. Paying minimum payments, it's pure interest. And they made a lot of money on me over the years. So anyways, fast forward, declared, went back to the States. That's when the West Coast road trip happened and everything else. I needed to go back to Spokane. I needed to sit in front of a judge. Swear to be honest, I'm under a photo of Jeff Sessions, which is just laced with irony. But then, sat there, told the judge, yep, I've been honest, like answered some questions, and that was it. And then I had to wait 6 weeks to find out if my debt was discharged. I just found that out a couple of days ago, and now it's over. It's done. I went from paying, I can be honest about it, why not? I went from paying about $2,100 a month just in debt to now I'm paying something in the range of like $300 a month for student loans. And that's it. It's a significant reduction. It's 9 times less. So that is a big reason why I've not been nearly as stressed out. I've not had to work absurd amounts anymore. Like, pull 2 bike tour shifts and then work on someone's website and then edit my vlog and then get, 4 or 5 hours of sleep and do it all over again. I've taken this as a little bit of a reprieve and I'm trying to figure out what to go from here. It's really good news. It feels so incredibly freeing. For one, I'm actually sleeping a little bit, which is good. My attitude has gotten so much better. Just being in France emotionally and spiritually, I feel like I healed up and got so much stronger anyways. And then you throw in the debt portion, that all that stress and that burden, that sense of shame and guilt that I was struggling so much to pay that off, and you remove that, I'm a free man, which is crazy. And there are a lot of questions that go along with it as far as like, am I not worried about my future? Like it'll be on my report, my credit report for 7 years, but I don't intend to buy a house or do anything back. I'm here. That was another gamble. What happens if they kick me out and I have to go back to the States and then I have no credit? In the States, you have to have like a credit score to rent a place, to get a cell phone, anything. And that's why like for me, it was very fortunate because like not only do I not own enough for them to take anything from me, but I live in France and they don't care. So I'm really free. I'm really a free man. I don't have access to copious amounts of credit. I don't want access to copious amounts of credit. I would love to buy a house here in France someday. Yes, an apartment. I hope to do so with cash, or at least, have a very small mortgage if I've got to have one. And that's why it's on the dream side of the dream board, because I don't know how that's going to happen. But yeah, I never want to go into debt again, ever. It was awful. Awful, 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 awful. So the only things I want to go into debt for ever again, maybe an apartment and maybe a spot on a rocket to Mars. That'd be kind of fun. But aside from that, not really. No, don't do that, because then you get stuck. That's like how every dystopian sci-fi novel starts. It also raises questions, of course, personally about like, this is how my grandma is finding out about this. Sorry, Grandma. And a lot of other people. It's very public, obviously, what I'm doing. But I think it's important because I know there are a lot of people struggling and were where I was at and are trying to figure out what to do. And there's no shame in it. Like, I feel really good about it. I think there's an awkwardness to it occasionally when it comes up, but that's also why not put it out there? It's out there now. And whatever, like I've got to live my life, and this is enabling me to live my life and not be trapped anymore, which is so good. Yeah, I think there are a lot of questions that come from it, and I'm sure I haven't covered all of them. And if you have them, feel free to ask them, and I'll try to answer them the best I can, whether in comments or whether I need to make a follow-up video. But this has been one of the single greatest stresses in my life for years. I've been poor my whole life. I've spent so many nights lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering where I was going to find the money to pay for car insurance or health insurance or anything, with an automatic debit coming out of my account to the next day without enough money in the account. That's been my life for so long. I want to leave that in the past. I never want to go back to it. So yeah, I'm still getting used to it, and I'm trying to make steps to take proper advantage of it and be as responsible as humanly possible and build from here, and hopefully never look back, and hopefully it's an amazing, free-flowing future ahead of me. But it's definitely something I've got to learn from, and definitely something that has been just a huge burden, but I'm glad to put it behind me, and I intend to leave it very much behind me. So yeah, that's my story about crawling out of rock bottom. Obviously things are going much better with Patreon. Thanks to patrons, I was able to even, go traveling this last weekend. Now I have work as well. It's crazy how through all of that, I didn't have work that was paying decently, but now I've got a good contract with a company back in the States. I'm teaching English. I'm doing voice acting and translation here in the city. So I went from being having absolutely nothing and being super, super stressed out to all of a sudden making a livable income and not being nearly as stressed out at all. And it's good. And I'm just trying to adjust to it. So yeah, I hope this story was helpful. I hope that it didn't freak anybody out. I realize it's weird because there's also the fear that somehow you won't like me anymore because I've had this happen to me, because I did this to myself, I suppose, more than anything, because this is my story. But I think that's silly, why I wouldn't think any less of anybody in my situation, which is still scary. This whole thing is scary. It's still really not fun. That's why I've not really wanted to do this, but I'm in a good place today. I'm in a good place in general. Life is going really, really well. And this is a fresh start. It's a new country, new career, new opportunities, new slate for the financial burdens, which I hope to keep unburdened this time. So anyways, if you have any comments, feel free to leave them below. If you haven't subscribed yet and you made it this far, congratulations. Feel free to subscribe. It'd be great to see you around. Most of my videos are not this heavy, and hopefully we won't talk about this much ever again, but I really did think it was important to put that out there and to put the pieces together for all of you that have known that there's stuff going on behind the scenes, known that there was stuff I couldn't talk about. I didn't want to leave you hanging forever, and I want to maintain that commitment, to be honest, and to share as much as I can with you while being safe. And so yeah, got to take some risks sometime. Anyways, I got to go. I need to go work, drink some coffee, and